Hey guys, welcome to another video. In this video we'll be covering some tips and tricks on how you can solve the history board exam, ICSE class 10th, and the general paper pattern of the history paper you'll receive in the board exam 2023. So let's start. So first of all, the paper is divided into two sections, section A and B. Section A, there are two questions. There is the first question which consists of 16 questions, each of 1 mark. So all in all the question 1 is of 16 marks. And then there's the second question which is of 40 marks. Question number 1 is just general MCQ, wherein there are questions asked which just ask you the most basic facts about all or mostly all of the chapters in the history and civics curriculum. So say for example, if I pick a question from the civics part of the entire subject, Lok Sabha member term is 5 years, so Rajya Sabha member term is what? Then if I go towards the question that asks, also the paper that I'm referring to is the specimen paper of 2023. You could find a link of the document given in the description box below. So if we arrive at question number 14, which of the following is a common ideology of fascism and Nazism? This question is related to the chapter fascism and Nazism, wherein there are 4 options provided: to believe in democracy, to encourage political systems, to uphold one party and one leader, to support communism. So it's very basic and brief facts about chapters, right? Identify the leaders of the non-aligned movement. Very basic questions asked, and each of 1 mark. So if we move on to question number 2, there are a total of 7 questions, as I mentioned before, each of 2 marks. These questions are not restricted simply to a certain section of the entire subject. They can be asked from any chapter, and they are not as short and simple brief facts that the MCQ, the question number 1 questions asked you. It's brief, but it's much more, you have to write in more detail than question number 1. So say for example, if we have state any 2 objectives of the Muslim League. So if you observe question number 2, they'll only ask you any two, what are the causes, any 2 objectives, any 2 ways. It's only objectives. So more than half of the question is of naming any 2 objectives, right? So you don't have to write an entire autobiography like you do in literature, right? You just have to write 2 points. So say for example, there is, if you look at the 5th question of question number 2, the 5th sub-question, what are the causes of the Quit India movement? It's of 2 marks, so you only have to write 2 points, and that's it, and then you can move ahead, right? So that's question number 2 of 14 marks. So according to me, part 1, extremely easy. You'll find no difficulty and probably getting 4 marks. You should, right? Okay, let's move on to part 2. Now, part 2 is also divided into sections. Pardon. So, part 2 is divided into 2 sections. There is section A and section B. Section A is entirely wholly solely consisted of civics, and section B is wholly solely consisted of history, right? Let's observe the section A part, the civics part of part 2. So they are asking us in question number 3 the legislature, in question 4 the president of India, and in question 5 they are asking about the judicial chapter or the section of the civics part of the entire subject, right? Now, in these types of questions, you have to attempt only 2, and you have to be extremely mindful of what chapters you can attempt, or what chapters you can easily understand, or what chapters are easy to memorize, right? So if you take my example, in class 10th, I had, you could say I had extreme difficulty in memorizing, jurisdictions and the appointments and you could say functions of chief judges, their appointment, lok adalats. I couldn't wrap my head around all these fancy terms, right? So for me, the union legislature and the union parliament, so it was the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, the president, vice president and the prime minister and the council of ministers. So I had done these 2 sections, and even if you do these 2 sections, you would be good to go. If you skip over the judiciary, there's no problem with it, right? So if you're a person who likes the judiciary, you could also attempt that and leave out the union. Moving to section B, we have question number 6, question number 7 and question number 8, which is so basically in the history part, so there's a civics part which is covered in section A, and there's a history part which is covered in section B. And history part is also divided into 3 subsections. There's the Indian faith, there's the starting of the Indian resistance to British colonization, and there's a middle section which is wholly solely dedicated to the Gandhian phase. And then we have the 3rd section, which is the contemporary world politics, wherein we will study chapters such as the First World War, the rise of dictatorships in the Second World War, and also the UN and its major agencies. So question 6, question number 7, question number 8 is wholly solely dedicated to the 1st and 2nd subsections of the history part, right? So say for example, question number 6, The culmination of discontent against the British rule came with the Great Revolt of 1857. So this is the first chapter, the first war of independence, 1857. What was the doctrine of lapse? Mention any 3 economic causes, mention any 4 administrative changes. Right, so in the first chapter you have to memorize the political, economic and military causes of the first war of independence and also the administrative changes made by the British after they had quelled the rebellion. So that's question number 6. And question number 7 is with reference to first and second phase of the Indian national movement. The first refers to the early nationalists and the second phase refers to the assertive nationalist phase. Answer the following. What was the objective of the assertive nationalists who partitioned Bengal? Mention any 4 methods used by early nationalists. So this is also related to the first. So question number 6 and question number 7 are closely related to the first subsection. Right, they are associated with the earlier assertive nationalist phase of, that is the first subsection of the entire history part. Now moving on to the second subsection, the Gandhian phase. Question number 8 is solely dedicated to that subsection itself. The last phase of the national movement led to the freedom of India. With reference to this phase, answer the following questions. We have the civil disobedience movement. We have mention any 3 causes of the non-cooperation movement. Mention any 4 causes of the Mountbatten Plan. So this question is also dedicated to the second subsection of the history part. Right. And then moving on to question number 9. Question number 9 and question number 10 are wholly solely dedicated to the third and final subsection of the history part, which is the contemporary world politics, which includes the world wars and the UN and its major agencies. I would ask to memorize the question number 9 also because it is quite easy and it is interesting to read. At least I found it interesting. And if you look at question number 6, question number 7 and question number 8, you can attempt any one of the following questions. Right, because question number 9, I'm sure you'll find it interesting, so you'll surely attempt that. And question number 10 is very easy. It's only memorizing the function. So question number 9 and question number 10 is a must. You could attempt any of the 3, it's up to you. Right. I memorized the functions, the Gandhian phase, right, the chapters under the subsection of the Gandhian phase. Right. You could also memorize the subsections under the first war of independence subsection of the history part. Right. So this brings us to the end of the paper pattern of the history board exam. Right. Now we'll be covering the tips and tricks that you could use in your history board exams. So let's go over them one by one. So the first tip is write points, not stories. The more concise and to the point, the better. So there's a common misconception among us that the more big our answers are, the more space our answers occupy in the exam paper, the more marks we'll get. That can work to a certain extent in literature and language, but not in history exam. Right, history exam is all about magic words and points. If you can write those 2 in a very, very short space, then you would also get full marks for that, instead of getting half marks for a page-long answer. The second point is make easy to remember mnemonics and scenarios. So what this point basically means is that points are sometimes hard to remember. So say for example, especially if you study the civics part of the entire subject, it's very difficult to remember, the functions of the president, the functions of the speaker. There's an administrative function. There are various things to remember. There's the function of the chief judge, the appointment of the chief judge, etc. So it can be quite heavy to remember all these points. So what I would advise is to make as many mnemonics as you can and to, stimulate scenarios in your mind. Right. So say for example, if you're asked about the functions of the prime minister, you could create instead of making a scenario, instead of providing a mnemonic, you could make a scenario, stimulate a scenario in your mind wherein you are the PM. And if you are the PM, what are the things that you have to take care of? So there's the international affairs, there's the domestic affairs, then you are the ex officio chairperson of the Niti Aayog and the Atomic Commission. So I'm in 11th now, I'm almost going to 12th and I still remember that point. Right, because it's a fun and playful scenario that I created in my mind, for which I can till date remember the points that were asked in class 10 finals. So it's a fun thing to do. If you can treat it as a fun thing to remember instead of a drag, then that would be helpful to you. Right. So if we move on to the third point, in order to remember points effectively, associate words with points. So this is kind of a last resort, but say for example, if there are certain points that you have to remember wherein you can't associate mnemonics and scenarios, then what I would recommend is associating words. Right. So say for example, if we have, again, if I take the previous example, the functions of the prime minister. So there's a point which also to date I remember. There's a point which says that all the opposition parties will support you even in the time of war. Right. So that's a domestic issue. Okay. And if I have to remember that single point, and if I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around the point, so I can associate it a single word with it, which is support or opposition support. That's it. And you can frame the point however you want to. It's not necessary to copy the point word to word from the textbook on the exam paper. The fourth point, probably the most important, attempt past 10-year history papers. It is extremely important. There will be a variety of questions asked. Variety as in, pardon, there will be a wide range of questions that will be asked, and in the more or less same pattern, right? So in the exam, so say for example in the current specimen paper, they have asked about the First World War. In some other paper, they might ask about the Second World War, or they might ask a question about the rise of dictatorships. So you can prepare your mind to receive every challenge, right, and be able to solve it efficiently, right? So that's a good practice of solving the past 10-year papers. You are not caught unawares if the board asks you an unexpected question, right? So it's a helpful thing. The fifth point, memorize various acts, movements, missions, etc. The fifth point basically is related to the second subsection of the history part, which is the Gandhian phase. So we have the Rowlatt Act, we have the Cripps mission, we have the non-cooperation movement, we have the civil disobedience movement. So memorize various acts, movements, missions is related to this concept, right? Then the sixth point, so whatever points I'll be going from the fifth point onwards will be basically some important things to remember about certain chapters, important chapters that we always ask without a doubt in papers. The sixth point is remember important dates. Example, what I mean by this is assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Choli Chor incident, very important, and UN existence formation. When was the UN formed? When did it come into existence? Which is the third date, right? I'm saying these third dates because these dates, because I memorized them well, which showed me very well in the history board exam. You know, many of my friends found that the exercise of memorizing dates was kind of, tiresome, and but it helped me in the longer, and I'm sure it would help you. And then we move on to the next point. Remember important leaders and contributions. This applies to the first subsection and the second subsection. What I mean by that is the early nationalist phase, the certain nationalist phase, and the Gandhian phase. So important leaders in early nationalists, you have Dadabai Nairoji, etc. We have the assertive nationalists, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, we have the Gandhian phase, we have Gandhi, then we have Cripps, what was his contribution, the Cripps mission, the functions, etc. So these are important things to remember. In civics, it is important to memorize important political posts. And what I mean by that is President, PM, Speaker, Chief Judge, and the Chief Judges of High Courts and their respective junior judges. Right. Their election, procedure, function, and impeachment. So these three things are the most important. So if I'm again taking the example which I took a few moments ago of the Prime Minister. So if you have to follow this point methodology properly, we would follow the Prime Minister's election procedure, the Prime Minister's function, and the Prime Minister's impeachment. Even if you remember these 3 points, it is more than right. And then finally on our last step, which is in judiciary, remember jurisdictions and their subtopics. So we have appellate jurisdictions, etc., which is very important. In the specimen paper also they have asked us in the MCQ, and so say for example, as I said before, attempting the judiciary is not, at least I wouldn't recommend it because it was heavy for me, but in case you are thinking of attempting it, there's nothing wrong with it. So they have asked us explain the terms advisory jurisdiction, right? So the jurisdictions are very important. And also in the MCQ we have asked us, when a case comes from a subordinate court, the High Court deals with it under which jurisdiction? Is it the advisory, or appellate jurisdiction? So the jurisdiction is a very important part of the judicial, the overall judicial subsection under the civics part of their subsection. So that's it. That brings us to the end of the video. I hope you learned a lot from this video, and I hope you implement it in your paper. I'll be making a geography video shortly, which will be released in a few days. Until then, I'll see you. Have a great day, and bye-bye.